This slide is going to be about pesticides and the intended effects and research. So pesticides are intended for the use of agriculture throughout the world, and pesticides have had an impact on many lives of animals, and currently countries are figuring out ways to keep them safe. And pesticides are designed to have an impact on the organisms only in which they are targeted for and have a minimal impact on those which they are not. Pesticides have had a large impact on the amount of food to be able to be produced at a larger rate than normal, and that has an impact on the population growth. And the pesticides that have caused the largest growth and effects are organophosphates. And currently, the United States is the highest in the use of pesticides, and mammals have the highest percent of publications at 22%.
A lot more information is known about the effects of pesticides on the intended target than on the surrounding species and environment. It has been found that although physical barriers limiting pesticide use do help to control negative impacts on most mammals, they are not entirely effective in preventing poisoning of other species. Contamination of water sources spreads toxins to other wildlife, and birds are not subject to physical barriers as much as other mammals are, and are therefore more likely to suffer acute toxicity. Insecticides such as organochlorines and DDT are applied at regular intervals and have been known to cause endocrine disruption in various species of birds, rats, and fish. DDT is also dangerous because it's a known carcinogen. These are not the only pesticides known to have these same or similar side effects. There are currently over 120 pesticides across various chemical classes that cause disruption of the endocrine system. Unfortunately, the efforts to make pesticides more specific to their intended function have not yet succeeded in preventing collateral damage to the surrounding environment.
Pesticides can become a very large threat to populations in an area. According to an article by Beyond Pesticides, a pesticide's hazardness to a population is measured based on persistence, application rate, their environmental fate, and their level of toxicity. In this slide, I'm going to be listing some examples of pesticides and how they affect different populations of organisms. A common pesticide explained in the article are known as organochlorines. These pesticides are known for being highly persistent and toxic. This type of pesticide acts as an endocrine disruptor. DDT is an example of an organochlorine and can affect the endocrine systems of organisms like rats, birds, and fish. For example, DDT causes bird eggshells to be weak, which decreases their likelihood of survival and leads to a decrease in their population. Insects such as bees are commonly used to research effects of pesticides on invertebrates. An insecticide derived from nicotine can be found in nectar and pollen. It binds to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in the central nervous system of bees. This insecticide causes overstimulation of the nerve cells and can cause altered behavior and functioning in bees. This can lead to a decrease in their population. Pesticides like DDT often end up in bodies of water through runoff or misapplication. Long-term exposure to these chemicals can lead to mutations and abnormalities in developing fish. This is due to their kidney, liver, and brain being extremely vulnerable to chemicals. Acute exposure can lead to mass deaths for fish population. Reptiles like alligators are affected by pesticides as their endocrine system as well as their reproductive system are often harmed, which later affects the number of individuals in their population. Similar to fish populations, pesticides can end up in the water system where reptiles like alligators live and lay their eggs. Fungicides are a type of pesticide for fungi that damage the cell membranes and interfere with the metabolic processes, decreasing their likelihood to reproduce and therefore decreasing their populations. The misuse of pesticides can contaminate soil and water, which can harm plants, affecting their metabolism and growth, as well as inhibiting the photosynthesis process, which can lead to a decrease in plant populations. Amphibians, such as frogs, have been subjected to population declines. There are signs of endocrine disruption, problems with development, and alters in the behavior of these populations, as well as a decrease in the reproductive rate, which has caused the populations of amphibians to decline due to pesticides. Carbamates are another class of insecticide, like organophosphates, that impair metabolic functions such as thermoregulation, intake of food and water, and interfere with regular functioning in vertebrae. This can also negatively affect weight loss and development in vertebrae. Reproduction is very difficult as many individuals in these populations don't survive the effects of pesticides. Therefore, the populations decrease or sometimes have a mass death. The lack of individuals in these populations affects the balance of the ecosystem.
This slide is going to be about community and ecosystem level effects of pesticides. I'm going to start off by defining what an ecosystem and community is. An ecosystem is made up of both living and non-living organisms that all live with each other in one common area, and a community is made up of living organisms, usually two or more species that occupy a common area. Effects of pesticides on communities are the changes in food which lead to the decline of natural enemies. The reason the food changes is because of pesticides affecting soil and even water, making different foods not grow as they used to. This makes natural enemies leave to find this food elsewhere, which then leads to change in the ecosystem. The decline of natural enemies can lead to an affected nutrient cycle. The way this is affected is because without these natural enemies, other animals are eating more plants and even other smaller animals than themselves than the ecosystem was currently used to. This then affects how the ecosystem functions without these predators, and with the affected nutrient cycles, the ecosystem could break down and eventually cease to exist. This slide
So, in regards to the effects of global change on pesticide consequences, there are very many questions regarding the pesticide change into the future of this world and the effect it will have on ecosystems, but we cannot put our finger on all of those effects just yet. We can only assume what is yet to come, considering it hasn't happened yet, and we can only make estimates and propositions for what will happen soon. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered. Some examples of predicted effects include, but are not limited to, potential climate change, indirectly, most likely, and it may also result in indirect change of natural selection. This could be because of the result in death of unhealthy organisms due to these pesticides. It could mess up food chains and potentially lead to disaster along the road. It also could cause infectious diseases, interference of plant communities or capabilities, and possible nutrient contamination or detriment.
Because pesticides are not specific enough to just target harmful species, they can be effective in killing species that are harmful to plants, but in the process often end up killing species that are helpful to the plants, which is severely negatively impacting biodiversity and ecological health. However, microevolution within species can build resistance to pesticide chemicals that prevent the non-target species from dying off. This is demonstrated in the image on the screen, where bugs that are eating the leaves survive being sprayed with pesticides and reproduce. The offspring possibly have that same resistance, and the trait becomes more common among the population as it is favorable for survival. Additionally, ecological networks, which are interactions within an ecosystem between species, can allow non-target species to recover from pesticide effects through processes of immigrating populations or regeneration of subsequent populations. Modern research for increasing complexity and specificity of pesticides to just target populations is necessary to regain biodiversity. Additionally, research regarding how climate change will impact the effects of pesticides is important in order to predict consequences and protect nature.